Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com and welcome to my Q&A session number 3. So to start, I need to give a major shout out to all of you. In January of 2019, I put out my Q&A call for questions, and you responded. So many questions, in fact, that I'm not just making one Q&A video, I'm making 2. So if you did send me a question and you don't hear it answered in part 3, take a look at Q&A session number 4 because there were too many questions, but thank you. Now just to kind of preface all of this, I really do want to stress that my answers are based on my own experiences, my opinions, my thoughts, and just everything that's kind of happened in my 30 years of tying and fishing. And that may be different from all of yours. So if there's something that I say that you're not quite sure about, just let's continue the discussion down below in the comments section because that's kind of where the ebbs and the flows of all these videos really start to take place. Also, if there's something that I say that you're like, yes, I agree, by all means, please mention that down below too. And then finally, throughout the course of this, I'll be talking about all of the links. And if I mention, hey, there's a link down below, those will all be housed in the description of this video. So with all of that said, thank you again for your questions. And now it's time for me to start answering some of them. So this first one is a really good one. This one's from Weaver. Weaver asks, I would like to know what is up with the Hungarian Partridge shortage. And I don't seem to recall, but have you talked about tying for a small profit? How do you get out there? Is it just building a name for yourself, or do you have to come up with an innovative pattern for folks to notice you? Oh, another question. I never seem to see women tyers featured. Can you please list some female tyers? All right, I'm going to try to kind of answer these in reverse order. Female tyers. There are a number of really great, just exceptional female tyers out there. Yes, I plan on featuring them in some of my fly tying videos. I'll be very honest, I won't tell you the names. I've invited at least 3 or 4, and there's a couple that are interested and really just working on getting the videos kind of set up and getting everything going. Making the videos can be kind of difficult, and some of the women fly tyers aren't really located in my area, so we're going to try to figure out how we can do it kind of a long distance style of recording. So hold on, I promise you, yes. On my Facebook page, I frequently will share out links to lots of other places, and one of them just recently in March of 2019 related to a woman by the name of Anne. She's got a wonderful website, so if you follow me on Facebook, you can see some of that stuff housed there. Your middle question talked about tying for a small profit. Well, that's definitely a really tricky one. And I guess I don't tie necessarily to sell to the public. I will tie, but not very often. And some of my friends that do tie, yeah, they can definitely turn a small profit. And they kind of start by going to their local fly shops and figuring out what kind of patterns they're looking for there. And I have another buddy who just started posting pictures on Instagram, and a lot of people reached out to him and wanted him to tie for them that way. So I would say start in one of those 2 realms, maybe social media, or contact your local fly shop and see where that leads. And then if anyone else has another suggestion, by all means, leave it down below in the comment section. And then finally, Hungarian Partridge. Yeah, the rumor is that there does seem to always be a shortage about those. What I can tell you though, the last time I checked, Competitive Angler has some of those Nature Spirits Select and Premium skins in stock, so start there. I put some links to those 2 skins down below in the description of this video. Also, try some alternative locations if you're not opposed to kind of skinning them yourself. My father loves to run English pointers in field trials, and sometimes I'll contact bird preserves, and at those preserves they'll have chuckers and quail and pheasants, and sometimes, if you're lucky, Hungarian partridges. So I'll buy a number of birds that way, skin them myself, kind of go through that entire process. It's a little bit more tedious, but it's a little bit better of a price. So I've kind of given you a couple options there. See if you have any of those bird preserves in your area, or if not, go down below. Competitive Angler has some pretty nice skins. All right, I had a little wardrobe change for this next question. Hi Tim, I'd love to know how to best set up my fly fishing vest for trout fishing. Thanks, from Xavier. First of all, Xavier, my current vest that you see, this is an Orvis sling vest. I've used this vest for a little bit over 1 season, and I can tell you it seems like every 2 or 3 years, I'm just completely looking for another style of vest. I've gone through so many vests in the last 15 years, and this is the one that I'm currently settled on. I really like it. I'll be doing a YouTube review on it at some point in the coming future. But I can tell you, if you check in with me in a couple years, that may change. But based on what you see now, and I hope I don't affect the microphone too much, so if it's a little staticky, I apologize. What I love about these sling vests, and I have this unclipped right now, there's really not much in the front, and I kind of prefer it that way. I have my hemostats right here. If I really wanted to be picky, I would probably like a pair of nippers as well, with maybe a needle in them just to clean the hook eyes and some other things in front. But what I like about this, I'll try not to disturb, it's really easy for me to just sling it around and have access to the front of my vest. Now, I believe you're asking about what's inside my vest and how do I organize it, and I can tell you, the outside pretty much always stays the same. I'll have my fishing license if it has to be displayed. I have a pair of nippers, and then I have my fluorocarbon, my monofilament, a lot of my tippets on the outside. And then as you kind of work your way inside, I tend to keep in the front pouch a lot of my terminal tackle, and I have some like little go boxes where I just keep a lot of really just flies that I know I'm going to be using for that day in there. Sometimes I'll also keep inside, or I'll move this outside. This is just a really simple fly patch, but what's nice about it, it allows air in, so once you've used those flies, that air will allow them to dry out. So I like to have a fly patch, but I keep most of my terminal tackle in that front pouch, and then in the larger pouch, this is the one where I keep everything based on situations. For instance, say it's the sulfur hatch. I'll have boxes with sulfur flies back here. I'll have my streamer boxes, and I'll kind of keep all that stuff kind of loaded in here accordingly. So I look at this fly vest as something that I'm going to be using a vest like this if I'm out for the day, for a half a day. This is basically what you'll see me with. If I'm going to be out for a longer trip and I feel like I'm going to have way more hatches, then I have a couple other vests that I'll use, but otherwise this is kind of my setup that I use, and someday I'll kind of give people access to everything I put in here, but it's constantly changing based on if I'm going trout fishing, smallmouth fishing, steelhead, stripers, and it's just constantly in flux. Best case scenario, I would have like 5 different vests, and I would have each of them loaded for whatever that style of fishing is. But I love this vest, so I'm constantly just changing stuff in and out. So I hope that helps, and for anybody else, if you have any suggestions on your vest setup, leave them down below in the comment section, or if we're friends on Facebook, shoot me an email at tcamisa@gmail.com and send your pictures, and I'd love to post those on Facebook for others like Xavier to see. The vest is off. Let's continue on. This is from the Hairy Man Walsh. Hi Tim, hope you're well. I'm new to your channel, so forgive me if you've answered this already. The question is, if you had to only put 5 flies in your fly box for a variety of fishing, which ones would they be? Thanks, and tight lines. And then somebody named A. Watt said, that is an excellent question. All right, so the Hairy Man Walsh, these are always really tricky questions to answer, but I'm going to answer it. So you've asked, I will answer it. Right now in Pennsylvania, it's early season. It's March. We're just starting up. So I'm going to base it on some of the flies that I would really have in there right now for the beginning of the season. I'm not going to just narrow it to 5, but I'm going to give you some ideas of what I would have in there. And I'll put links to any of these flies in the description of this video if I have a tying video for them. The first one, early season, blueing olives. One of my favorite is the WD-40. That's an absolute go-to in my box, not just for beginning of the season, but all season long. Add it. Number 2, whenever we have a little bit of higher water, I like to have something like either an eggs to sea egg or a swarmy wormy. They both just catch me a ton of fish, so I'd have one of those 2 in there. For a streamer, I love to have streamers in my box for early season, especially if I'm fishing a stream that has stocked fish in it. Those stocked trout love streamers, so the 2 that I would narrow it to would be either EP articulated streamer, I just love articulated streamers right now, or a black ghost. There's something about white marabou that stocked trout just seem to love. Those are my 2 streamers. For nymphs, if I had to narrow it down to a couple, the France fly has been just a really great go-to fly for me recently. A pheasant tail on a jig hook, or the Waltz worm blowtorch, again on a jig hook. So any of those 3, or I'd have all 3 of them. For stonefly imitations, it's tough. There's 2 that I love. Pat's rubber leg and Josh Miller's Beachbody Stone. They're both great. They work for me. They're heavy, they get down to the bottom in a hurry, and I just love carrying stoneflies. And then finally, for a dry fly early season, if I had to just have one, I'd probably carry a Griffith's gnat in just a variety of different sizes, simply because if there's midges hatching, they'll take that. Even for blooming olives, they'll take that, it seems like. So you asked for 5 flies, I probably gave you more like 10, but I did answer the question. Continuing on, this one comes from Cousins Outfitters. I've seen your videos on things you need to start tying nymphs and dry flies. Could you do one about streamers? Cousins Outfitters, I would love to. Trust me, I really, really want to make a video about these are all the materials that you need to have for tying streamers. The sky's the limit. It's just overwhelming to think about that, just from hooks and threads, and then you start piling on tailing fibers and just all the different hairs and all the naturals and all the synthetics. So the short answer is I'm probably not going to do that one. There's no promises. Maybe there's a slight chance, but I can tell you when I've released those other videos about materials that you need to have if you're tying for dry flies, I put a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy into that video. And once it was released, I was just so nervous that somebody was going to say, Tim, you forgot this. And it was going to be some just obvious one that I forgot about. And I am by no means an expert or anything, but I really just put so much time and effort into that video. I really thought and I hoped it would just encompass so much. I now have watched that video just recently, and I've realized there are a few more things that I would add to it. So I may do an addition to one of those videos, but I can tell you, it's just so encompassing that it's tough for me to say if you have this stuff, you have it all covered. I'm sorry. Let me continue on with Olaf's Water View. People say tying threads only last a couple to a few years on the spool. Obviously depends on thread weight. But tied flies will last 50 plus years if stored properly with that same thread. Why is this? I've never heard anyone talk about these two lines of thought in the same discussion. What's your take? So that's a really interesting question, and I have heard people in the past say every year or every couple years they throw away their thread and they start fresh. I disagree with that notion. I do not throw away thread until it starts to break. If I'm tying a fly and it starts to break, then that thread may be bad, but I typically will also blame maybe UV on that. And I keep all of my threads stored in just a really dark area, so there's no sunlight just accessing them whatsoever. So I really don't throw them away until I notice that thread is just starting to break whenever I'm tying with it. However, I only tie with a few, kind of weights, I guess, or deniers of thread. So I reached out to an expert. I reached out to Martin Lapine. He's the owner of Unithread, and I basically sent him your question, and here's his reply. He said, thread in itself is good for many years, but for Uni anyway, they put wax on it. The wax is drying with the time, and it makes a white powder when you touch it as it dries. You can put the spools in hot water to kind of re-moisten them. They also sell unwaxed thread. So I replied to Martin, thanks, but does the wax deteriorate, or does it just make powder? And would that cause the thread itself to lessen over time? And Martin's reply was, the wax just makes powder whenever it dries, and it will not cause the thread to deteriorate. So will thread deteriorate? Yes, but there's no set timeline on when it will. So I hope that kind of answers your question. That's not a definitive black and white, your thread's bad after X amount of years, but I hope that helps at least a little bit. Let me continue on. And the next one, Dear Mr. Kamisa, wow. I am not sure if you're still accepting fly tying questions for your next Q&A video, but if you are, what's the best way to deal with static electricity at the fly tying table? It's so annoying, by Ruben Ryder. Ruben, that was just an awesome question, and you really forced me to research that one, because right now my main fly tying station is in an unfinished basement. I don't have that problem. It's a cement floor. I also tie in my living room at times. We have hardwood floors, no problems there. So I don't have that issue with static electricity, but I'm kind of envisioning that someone who's tying on carpet could have that. So my initial thoughts just go to, I know many tyers that whenever they have their tying room, they have a plastic mat and a wheelie chair that kind of runs on that mat. So that could be one thing that could help. So the other thing that I kind of thought about is static electricity can also be caused by a decrease in humidity. So can you increase the humidity? That could include something like a humidifier. Also for clothing, I know if you put fabric softener in your dryer, that will help as well. But I've even read something online where if you rub those sheets on your clothing, that will help to lessen static electricity. There's also some moisturizers, and I do have an interesting read that I'll put down below. It's a really interesting read, and it talks about just how to get rid of static cling. So I hope some of that stuff helps, Ruben, and please let me know if you find out anything, and if there's anyone out there that's listening that you also had problems with static electricity at your fly tying bench, let us know down below in the comment section how you solved it. Let's continue on. And did I tell you really good questions this time? All right, this one comes from Russell Lizer. Tim, how often do you tie? Suggestions for beginners, how often should they tie? And what's the best place to learn what to tie? That's a really great question, Russell, and there's really no correct answer. I love to fly fish. So if I have to choose fly fishing or fly tying, I'm always going to choose the former simply because my tying is really there to supplement fishing. So I love the peaceful aspect of it. I love just that tranquility. Kind of brings clarity to so many different things when I am tying. However, again, fly fishing kind of trumps fly tying for me. Whenever you ask how often should beginners tie, as much as possible. I can tell you whenever I first started tying flies, I was tying flies like at all moments of the day. And they weren't just flies that I was going to fish with. They were just flies that I like to look at. And they were flies that I thought, that one looks cool. And they're flies that really came out very poor. And I would take a razor blade and cut everything off and re-tie again because I couldn't afford more hooks. So the short answer is tie as much as you can because it definitely will improve your tying. But whenever you do tie, try to be very intentional in what you're doing. Either tie it based on a pattern and say, I want all of my flies to have the same proportions as this one. Or I expect we'll say maybe how thin of a body you're trying to dub. And you say, I want to make sure each one is as thin as this one. So whenever I say tie as much as you can, it's not necessarily a quantity issue, but it's really quality over quantity. And again, try to be very intentional in your tying. And the best place to learn what to tie, I mean, YouTube, of course, right? No, but there's some other places. If you have a local fly shop in your area, by all means, start there, bring in your flies, and ask them for suggestions. I know so many people that love to get their suggestions from Facebook or from some of the online chat forums, and that works. But just kind of be cautious because it's one thing for people to just throw out 500 things that you can do to make the fly better, but it's another thing to bring a pattern or a fly into a shop and then have the owner or an employee sit down and say, hey, let me just show you in a few minutes, because most really good fly shops are more than willing to sit down with you, have you tie that fly again, kind of give you a tip here or there, and then hopefully sell you a couple materials to tie your next fly. That's what good fly shops are known to do. So by all means do that. I am also I kind of push people, if you can, to take a fly tying class, just because you can kind of connect with a larger group at that class, and then have connections that you can kind of ask for feedback in the future. I've also hinted at some big news over the last maybe year or so, and it relates to an upcoming fly tying book. So fly tying books, but that's all I'm sharing for now. So I hope that kind of helps to answer your questions, Russell. Let us continue on. We have a couple more. This one's from Greg S. This is another really great question. Hello, Tim. I'd like to see some flies that can be used in bottom release tailwaters and still be fished with a European nymph style rig. For example, midge larva and pupa pattern sizes 20 to 28, the small stuff. Tiny mayflies 18 to 24. In some of the tailwaters in the west, the fish feed selectively in the 42-degree water. There are also split shut shy as well as indicator shy. That's why Euro nymphing seems the way to go. If we use the weight of the flies to cast and get into the feeding zone of the fish, how can we do this with these very tiny flies? I'm not talking about the larger patterns or annelids such as the San Juan worms or squirmy wormies, bunny leeches, or even the mysis shrimp that are in some of these tailwaters, but tiny mayflies and midges. Some fly tying tutorials with your standard how to fish these flies would be greatly appreciated. Well, Greg, that's a great question, and I love that it's extremely technical, and I can imagine myself in some of these technical situations. The first thing that I'm going to tell you before I answer the question the way that I think you want me to answer it is, don't hesitate to try some of the larger Euro nymph patterns on a Euro style rig and see how they perform. And I'm not saying size 18s. By all means, go with size 18s, try 16s as well. You will be surprised, because the one advantage of that Euro style rig that I believe you're going to have is that you have so little tension kind of pulling that fly off of the bottom or out of that feeding zone that it will appear so much more lifelike than all those other drifts that you've had. So first of all, start with some of those larger sizes, try them on a Euro rig and see how they work. Now, if the fish seem to refuse them and you're first asking what style of patterns, check out Pat Dorsey's Instagram. Pat is he's a wonderful small fly tire and fly fisherman. He's a guide in Colorado. I recently did a fly fishing show with him, and he's just got some great stuff. So check out his Instagram first. Some options that I'm thinking from that fishing perspective. Have you tried a dry dropper? So maybe try that Euro style rig to a dry fly and then have those tiny nymphs going off of that dry fly. Because then with that Euro style rig, you're going to be able to pick up your leader almost directly to that dry fly, have very little drag on the water, and then allow those small flies to just dip or dive right below that dry fly. Also, maybe try a yarn indicator, because I know of a lot of fish that are very leader shy, but if you try a yarn indicator that lands really soft and has a very neutral color, that may not spook them as much. Next, maybe try oversizing the beads on those smaller flies, and we're talking size 20s, and fish 2 in tandem. So if you fish 2 size 20s with tungsten beads and a little bit of wire on the body, it will get them down in a hurry. Next, fish the really tiny fly as a dropper higher up the tippet. So maybe have a larger pattern like that shrimp pattern you were talking about, or a bunny leech on the bottom, and then have some of those smaller ones kind of hanging off as droppers a little bit higher up, especially if the fish are feeding, and it sounds like they might be in that temperature water. And then finally, the other tip I have is use the lightest fluorocarbon tippet that you can get away with. I'm talking 7X. I'm going to assume you already are, but use that fluorocarbon. It's got that abrasion resistance, and it's more prone to sink versus the mono, so it will help those flies get down in a hurry. So those are some of my best tips that I have related to that, and I hope they work for you, Greg. And then let's jump into one more. This one's from Fred Stumpf, a friend on Facebook. He said, please tell everyone who got you started fishing, tying, and how long ago. Also, we still miss you at the Sowbug Roundup, Bob. Tony's doing much better, Tony Spezio, and I know would love to see you. God bless. Well, Fred, thank you so much. God bless you too. I have not gotten down to the Sowbug yet. I promise, and I sincerely just know that someday I will get there in the future. So please keep inviting me. I appreciate it. I can tell you my start was 30 years ago. I had some wonderful mentors when I first started getting into fly fishing and fly tying. I've had just a great ride along the way. I can tell you I've told that story a few times, even in the last year, kind of my story of how I got into fly fishing, and I've been very fortunate. I've been interviewed on a few different podcasts. So Fred and anyone else who's interested, if you like listening to podcasts, if you're addicted like I am, the 3 that I've been recently featured on, the Wet Fly Swing with Dave Stewart. He interviewed me once. It was a great conversation. I also met up with Rob Giannino from Fly Fishing Journeys at the International Fly Tying Symposium. He recorded a show there. It was a lot of fun doing that one with Rob, so that would be another one to check out. I talk a lot about my father in that one. And then the most recent one that I did was with 3 individuals. Their names are Mitch, Aldo, and Yoma. They're called the So Fly guys. They're from Canada. It's the So Fly podcast. It's a blast. I wasn't with them in person because they're just a little bit further away, but it was a phone interview for their podcast. It was an hour and a half long. So Fred, if you're really interested, tune into that one. I told a lot about my past and my history there. So I hope that kind of makes sense. And be sure to tell Tony I said hello as well. Well, with all of that said, let's wrap up this Q&A session number 3. Thank you so much for all the questions. I will be continuing it in Q&A session number 4. But in the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below in the comment section, or you can email me at tcamisa@gmail.com, and that email address is listed down below in the description of this. If you'd like to watch some of my fly tying videos or some related to fly fishing or my other Q&A videos, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. Once you're there, if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you'll find a little email address. Sign up, you put in your email address, and I'll send you monthly updates that just give video updates, fly tying and fly fishing tips and tricks. So thank you ahead of time for signing up, And if you're into social media, you can find Trout and Feather on Facebook and on Instagram. So many ways, so many different things out there. But once again, thank you everybody, and I'll see all of you next time.